Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me today. My guest is Nancy MacMillan. She's a psychotherapist and spiritual care expert who's worked closely with the dying and those who love them. Nancy brings deep experience in helping people navigate grief, mortality, fear, and healing through both clinical tools and sacred presence. So, Nancy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's a pleasure to be here and have a conversation about things that are not as so easy to talk about in
This, this
usual times.
This is true. I find that, my guests on my show don't have trouble talking about it, but I do find a lot of people in our culture don't feel comfortable talking about grief, and yet we're all going to experience it at some point in time in our lives, whatever that loss might be. So I find that to be. So tell me, how did you get started with working with death and dying? Is that kind of what your clinical practice focuses on as people who are grieving?
Yeah, sure has been. And what led me into my work was having a number of experiences, quite personally about encounters with death, my own mortality,
Mhm.
and with parents who both died. And that led me into, being more curious and interested in leaning into death, which
Yeah.
is, trying to lean into it rather than away from it, because that's almost the practice that our culture has learned how to do. So we have less experience being up close with death. And, is that why there's so much fear around it? There's sort of, we've become insulated from it. And so then we make assumptions about it, and TVs make assumption about it. And so we get images of death that, from my experience being up close to it more often, I've been able to see that it can be something different. And that's really propelled me to want to talk about it, write about it, and try to bring another sensibility around death.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
You know what strikes me about as you're talking about that is how our culture here thinks of death as being, horrible, and so we should avoid it at all costs. And what that leads to in our healthcare system, I'm assuming around the world this is the case. I know you're in Canada, is people being on life support or whatever, well beyond when quality of life has ended because they don't want to die. So I think that is kind of one part of it where people it's a fear, right? It's a fear. It's more of a I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm fearful of it, and so on. So I think that's kind of
Right.
one thing, and we
Yeah.
spend a lot of money on end of life treatment that's
Yeah.
in many cases futile,
Yes.
but that's a whole different topic.
You know that very well. And, some statistics say like 75% of us might end up in the ICU. And, is that the way we want? Nobody really wants that as our ending. So how can we back things up so that we can navigate that a little more consciously? How do we bring more consciousness to our obviously end days that are going to come? So
Mhm.
backing things up, whether that's through, more conversations, advanced care planning, um, and getting to see. It's hard to get to see death if you've been away from it so much, but if you do have people in the hospital, like being able to go and visit and spending time at the bedside, and talking even with the people that you're with about what it is it like to be dying. Can we say those words and be in the same room with that word, that reality,
Yeah.
and not leave our loved one or friend alone in that reality, but
Yeah.
be with them? And the richness of conversation that can come by being real and allowing death into the room as a companion that we have to get to know
Right.
brings such a depth of relationship. And, maybe that means crying together. Maybe it means saying, I'm going to miss you, and crying together But, doesn't that make life so much more rich and meaningful? And it starts us down that road of what real grief and living with it and letting grief shape us and do its work with us, which is, a hard task, but it's a transforming one. And if we allow it to do its work, we will be transformed and we will be richer people in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we will do something with it. You will make something beautiful out of it, like you're doing with these podcasts, that we can make something out of our suffering and our grief.
Absolutely. Two things came up for me in my head as you were talking. First one was when you were talking about people don't want to die in the ICU. I have a very good friend who's a hospice nurse, and I've had her come and speak to my students about end of life care and so on. And she does some statistics, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but how many people would say they would like to where they'd like to die, and the majority of them are staying at home, but the majority of people actually do die in the hospital. And so she kind of relates that to, as you were saying, what was your plan? Have you expressed your plan? Have you written it down? Those types of things, so that people know, your family know where you'd like to be, rather than in the hospital, very expensive care, and I'm not comfortable. I mean, I was in the hospital recently, and it's not comfortable to be in the hospital. It's very expensive. So, the other thing that came up to me when you said about acknowledging that someone's going to die. So my children, because I had a disabled son that we knew was going to pass away, my two older children, I had discussed with them what death meant, and so on. They were, I think, in the 5th and 7th grade at the time. And my stepmom was quite ill with breast cancer. Actually, she was dying. And we went down there to visit. And my son said to her, Grandma, I'm really going to miss you when you're gone. And I remember my dad was very uncomfortable, because acknowledging that his wife was dying to him was not comfortable. But it inspired this conversation between my son and his grandmother that was absolutely beautiful. And I'm certain it helped her. And I know my son was, he just wanted to tell her, I'm really going to miss you, and what I'm going to miss about you, and acknowledge that. And we never saw her again. She died a couple weeks later. So, really was very powerful. But I don't know how many people do that, but I love that you brought that up, because I know that was pretty powerful in my family's life.
Oh, and that probably helped, his grandmother not be alone in it. Like, can you imagine the biggest, the elephant in the room, basically, and nobody wants to let it in.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
I made a practice of talking to my mom about dying and death,
Mhm.
for many years. It was my interest, of course, but um, because her memory was always changing, I could always bring it up, and she wouldn't remember that we've talked about it. So that was one of the reasons as well.
Yeah.
And I think she was in a long-term care home towards the end, and whenever we talked about dying and death or how she'd like things to be,
Mhm.
she became more present. Her memory, her faculties, she became more lucid because it was important and relevant.
Yes. Yeah.
Most things that are going on in their lives or the conversations are about, mundane or inane things, right? So have something actually important,
Yes.
make gives them some validity and honors them as intelligent,
So,
soulful.
so true. I'm yes, absolutely. I'm 100% agreeing with everything you've said. Um, I think it is important for people to express to their family what it is your wishes are. So,
Mm.
I mean, I have had all my power of attorney, all those documents I've had in place for a very long time, because of my experiences with, you don't know how long you have here, sort of thing. But to really I think it's easier for the people left behind to know, what do you want? You want this, you want that, whatever, so that you aren't dealing with it when the person's no longer able to talk to you about it. So I think that's very helpful too. So, some people are really uncomfortable. So tell me a little bit about what are the most common fears and anxieties that people have about death and dying.
Mm. Well, I think we can each answer that in our own way. I think it's, the fear of what's next,
Like, right? Yeah.
and so that's part of the conversation to have with people. You can do your advanced care planning of all the wishes, but also can we lean a little bit forwards and say, so what do you think happens afterwards? Can we just open that conversation up
Hmm.
and let our imaginations take us to that next step of beyond? And then it can be a playful thing, it can be an imaginative thing. Obviously, some people will have religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. Some people don't, but everybody has an imagination that can help them take that next breath in a sense of what's going to be next. And I think whenever I brought that up to people who are dying, and even if they have no spiritual religious convictions, I'll say, have you ever experienced, a loved one after they've died in some way? Y- And almost every one of them will say something, something strange had happened or some
Right.
synchronistic event had happened that opened up. It's like, well, maybe there is something there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if most people have that sort of experience, it's one way or the other, how can we live our life to make that, part of our life and inform our life and inform, to help us have more courage for that, the next steps. That is another transition, it's another stage of life, we could call it, after death.
Yes, and I don't know that I've shared this with many people, but my son passed away at home. My son when he was 4.5, and I was with him when he passed away, and I knew he was dying. He was very, very ill the week before he died, and I was there with him, holding him when he passed away, and that sensation of I want to say like I'm gonna use the word spirit kind of passing through me and the calmness and so on that I felt from him was really I mean, it's really hard to explain, but I think I'm talking about what you're dealing with there, was really I felt it was the best one of the best gifts I've ever been given was that I got to be there with him and, have him I don't know, whatever, and he was nonverbal, he was very disabled, so he didn't ever speak to me, with words, but I just felt that, and it was amazing. So,
Thank
yeah.
you so much for sharing that. And that's the subtle art that we're talking about of perceiving what's going on. And I
Yes.
think the closer we are to death or dying of our loved ones, as hard as that is,
Yes.
the greater chance that we'll feel that
Mhm.
there is something more that, and that is actually oddly beautiful is
I
going
would
on.
absolutely describe it as beautiful. Beautiful. So I call it the greatest gift I've ever been given, and people kinda look at me like, "We what now?" And I think you don't understand. It was very again, I wanna use the word spiritual, but I'm not a religious person, so I don't mean it in a religious way. I mean it in a s a feeling way, if you will. And in my case, my son, really again, he was very disabled, really responded to the color yellow. So, yellow always reminds me of Ian, and I know when I'm having a really bad day, for example, I am always confronted something yellow will come up for me, and it'll be, like I went to visit the cemetery the other day to bring him some flowers, and there were yellow buttercups cups growing all over his grave. No one else's grave around him, but he had little yellow
Oh,
cups, which was really cool. So when I see that, I always think of that as signs that he's, "Hey, mom, I'm hanging around. I'm looking over you," and so on, which I absolutely, I just love that. So that's part of my process with losing my son for sure. So, and again,
well, it's part of my process too of just having been with my father when he died. And I was in my 30s, so I wasn't, it was new to me, this work. And afterwards, I had this feeling that my hands were longer. I could stretch longer. And it was as if I could take on more now. It was like he was giving me this image, this nudge that he was going to help me take on more things in life.
yeah,
And so with that image and dreams I've had of my beloveds who've died, it's just given me a sense that we can keep a connection going.
yes,
And, whether it's psychological or spiritual,
mhm,
it all works together and it helps us include them in our lives, you know,
yes,
a- and they still want to be. Really, our ancestors all knew this. We
yes,
come from lineages where this was just part of our heritage, that our loved ones who are dead are in the next room. They're
yeah,
not gone, they're not lost, they're right close by.
right,
But we have to turn to them a little bit to include them and welcome them.
yes,
Otherwise, they don't have a way in to be present and to give us those nudges, give us those yellow buttercups
yes,
or the cardinal that lights on your windowsill when you needed that friend.
Right.
you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, for sure. I mean, another example, my husband that I'm married to now, we got married 5 years ago, and I had my other two sons walk me down the aisle. It was an outdoor wedding, and my there was a dragonfly that kept flying around. I mean, it was in the whole thing. It was everywhere, whatever. And I was like, oh, I wonder, is that my Ian saying, hey, I'm here too. I'm here too. I'm the dragonfly here. So
Yeah.
dragonflies have a special place for me, but that's fun. So tell us about your book. I know you've got your book there. We're going to put a link to it in the podcast notes for people so they can find it easily. But what inspired you to write it, and what's it
Mhm.
all?
Sure. What really struck me most deeply was when I was with my mother when she was dying, the long dying time. And then when she died, we made the decision to bring her body home
Mhm,
and take care of her body in our house for the 3 days and wash and care for her body and tend her in with, small care team. But the intimacy and the beauty of that experience just transformed my sense of what death can be like
mhm,
and how it can help us with our grieving.
mhm.
And so that started me on this journey of wanting to share that picture. Well,
Right.
one thing led to the other, and my many other experiences of being with many people at their bedside came forth, and then my own experiences with illness. So that became many stories just to illustrate different ways that we can enter the world of death and dying,
Mhm.
and maybe to find our own place to take another step, to open up the door, to make it a little easier for us to entertain how we ourselves can anticipate our own dying or that of another.
Yeah. So is it a kind of like your story or a compilation of stories
That it's part memoir,
okay,
but memoir mixed with my professional experiences. It's called creative nonfiction at this point,
okay,
the narrative nonfiction. So lots of very informative ways on how to be present with grief and the dying. Technical things on how to be with somebody a person who's died in their body, and then many stories of what it's like to wrestle with one's own illness that could be could lead to your own mortality. My own experiences with breast cancer, um, and even animal death. How we process the loss of our dear pets, and that is all a way that we, are brought to our knees.
yeah.
And hopefully we can allow that process to unfold and that it can just more deeply enrich us and we can keep moving with that, what it's brought to us. So it's a compilation of many small stories under a bigger umbrella of this whole thing of carrying our loved ones and ourselves through dying and death and beyond.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I saw this in my notes from my person who does my notes for me, about funeral homes and green burials and how they're making a comeback. So, um,
Yeah.
what is a green burial? I think I know, but tell us what it is.
Sure. Green burial is well, it's another option on how we can bring our sense of wanting to be closer to the earth, with the earth, and not harming the earth through creating, natural ways to bury bodies. So with green burial, you don't need to be embalmed. In fact, it's recommended you're not embalmed. You have a natural material casket or you have a shroud, and you're buried 3 feet under, not 6 feet under,
Okay.
because our decomposition happens much more quickly and we actually aid the earth
Mm,
by decomposing our bodies in relation to all the microorganisms that are closer to the surface of the earth.
right.
And that combined with it being in an environment where we're not putting big headstones and we're not doing a lot of chemical spraying, it's creating a natural environment so that we can, have our bodies being with nature and wildflowers and trees. So
Mm.
that's the goal. And there are many green burial sites now available. So that's very exciting.
That is exciting. It's reminding me, I was in New Orleans in Louisiana in December. It's one of my favorite cities to visit. As I mentioned before we started recording, I absolutely love to visit old cemeteries. And of course, their cemeteries are amazing, and they're all above ground. And the way they work, or they have like the bodies put in, and then it degrades to the bottom, and then the next one goes in, and so on. So the remains, if you will, are becoming ashes at the bottom of this grave rather than caskets and so on. It's really an amazing thing to see how they
Right.
there, but it's kind of that idea where you're not taking up a plot of land somewhere with, 10 people. Their remains are all in this place there, and they don't do embalming and all that kind of stuff. So it's no chemicals involved. It's just and they're with their loved ones, the remains of their loved ones in there, which like the family burial plot, whatever, which I think is just
Right, right. And the beauty of being like, it's only in my later years that I've come to appreciate cemeteries again
yeah.
as a very evocative place to go and to have commemoration and a place that's part of the earth where we can go to and do our small little deeds that bring us in relationship to our loved one again and the earth. So it's a lovely, soulful way we can interact with the whole thing of death and dying in the earth.
Yes. No, I agree. I don't know. I'm no judgment on somebody who wants to do, scatter the ashes, whatever. But I personally find it very. I don't know. I really like. I actually enjoy going to the cemetery and talking to my son and so on and so forth. Having being there.
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
I personally I like that. I know there's a lot of people who don't do it. Whatever. Again,
Right, right. I think we've lost touch with the point of it. So, it's like with almost every facet of the whole thing of death and dying, we have to bring more consciousness to it to then remember why and when do we make it meaningful again.
right. Yeah. And to also remember that not everybody grieves or processes these things in the same way. So there's not one right way.
No,
But
absolutely not. It's just bringing back, and with cremation, we can still do cremation in a meaningful way, but it's just bringing, okay, how do we make that? I think what what prompted me to speak more about it was how many people have cremains in their basement.
oh yeah. Yes.
We did. My husband had his parents because we didn't know what to do with them.
Right, right.
So it's again just finding where do we honor and where can we make a meaningful moment happen.
Yes, I have made it very clear in all of my documents to my children that I do not wanna be on somebody's mantle, and yeah, don't leave my cremains like that. Or who's gonna be responsible for me? It's like, no, 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 I don't wanna deal with that. But yeah, you're right with that. How many people are held up somewhere in the basement or the garage or wherever you might be, and where did they wanna be? So kind of that's part of that conversation of, what do you want me to do with your remains or your cremains, whatever,
Right,
gone, rather than I'm gonna make that decision based on my own. For example, my stepmom, my dad's wife, they had not really discussed it because it just wasn't a comfortable topic for them. So, he just assumed, "Okay, well, we'll just do a regular burial, whatever," and so on, and I'm thinking, "Was that what she wanted to do, or is that just kind of what she thought she wanted to do?" So, yeah, that comes into mind. And again, it isn't a comfortable conversation for everyone, that's for sure. So, that the next question I have for you, I though this is kind of an interesting one about, helping people learn to die before they die. So how can people kind of become more comfortable with the concept that I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to any of us that we're not gonna get out of this life alive. We're all gonna go at some point in time, but just how do we become more comfortable and in tune with that?
right. Well, it's going to look different for each of us. Um, but as I try to point out in my writing, it's sometimes it's the small things of letting go of things that we may have some strong attachment to that just gives us some practice of what it is to let go. How
Mhm.
do we let go at the edge of anything and know that there's more after that? So
Yeah.
it's a bit of trust, and it's a bit of wrestling with our ego, what our sense of what we think we should have or want, and can we let go of that need and see what happens and see that it's okay. So these are building in the small things of letting go, dying to what we think we need to have or our ego wants, and knowing that's okay. And that builds up a muscle that we can then get stronger for the bigger letting goes as we get closer to our loved ones dying or our own death. We have to start on smaller things so that we have that capacity to do harder work at the end.
Do you find either in your professional work or with clients, whatever, that people who have experienced more grief or death and so on are more comfortable with their own death and dying? So, for example, having lost people very close to you, and then when you're thinking about your own end, less fearful, less. I don't know how to phrase that. Do you find that?
Mm. Well, I suppose it depends on what that experience was like for them. And have they been able to process it? Have they been able to be transformed by it, by being up close and seeing that, oh, maybe this dying was more peaceful than I thought. And that gives you confidence that
Yes.
maybe my dying will be more peaceful than the imaginations that can come in when we don't see that. That, our bodies have an intelligence on how to die, just like we know how to be born. Our bodies do know how to die. And allowing that process to happen is safe.
Right.
And
Right.
and it's not as painful as it might be, as we might be fearful of. I think we fear pain
Yeah.
and loss of dignity, but palliative care has come so far that pain is seldom the issue.
Right.
There's other kinds of pain, which is more our anxieties and our fears.
Mhm.
And our loved ones can play a big role in being a presence, a calm presence, a loving presence that can help bring that kind of pain to a level that can be worked through. So we
Yes.
do have a role to help our steady mind be a refuge and our loving heart be a calm environment to help people through the pain and the fears that come towards the end.
Yes, I think the reason why that occurred to me to ask you that is my experience, as I mentioned with my son, is the only person I've ever been in present with who's as they're passing away. And it was such a beautiful thing for me that it really transformed my whole thought about my own death to say, gosh, if it's that amazing, I mean,
Mm.
what's there to be afraid of? I mean, it's just, and I know sometimes people think I'm morbid when I say things like that, but it's like I'm just saying, it did really change my mind shift on what our own end will be like and how it's not this, clutching, whatever. It can be very, very, very beautiful. And yes, and again, I'm going to use the word spiritual again. So that's one of those things. But I know. How about the role of myth, dreams, and ancestors in dying? That was the other question that your Gail had
Okay.
suggested I ask you.
Right. Um, well, it's been said that, if we don't have a place to situate death within a bigger context, such as myth or poetry or art, then we get lost and fear fills the void.
Hmm.
So 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 I just, anything that brings you into creative expressions in art and poetry are filled with being able to take us across a threshold of our imagination where more is at play. And I believe, at the end of our days, however our imagination will take us, it is not a nothing. Our world is full of evidence that creation has so many levels to it,
Mhm.
and that will hopefully shore us up to know that transformation keeps happening, and we're part of the creativity of all the earth, and hopefully that will give us more confidence
Mhm.
that it's not just all meaningless mayhem. There is a life force that we're part of a cycle of, and we're part of a big cycle that includes death,
Right.
life and death, and who knows what the circular spiral will lead us onto. But that's part of my hope, is to bring a more perspective that we're part of a big cycle,
Yeah.
and it's not over.
Right.
Nothing is ever over. Yeah.
On off switch, if you will. So
Birth and death and rebirth, it's all part of our in-breath, our out-breath, and, so yes, and our dreams, um, many people will have had experience of dreaming of their loved ones after they've died. So, what is that? There's mystery abound, and we can't have answers, defined answers for all of these questions, but our wonderings and allowing mystery to um, to make us wonder. And living with wonder is a pretty wonderful thing to edge into.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. And I think go back to something else that you said earlier is to just kind of to be open and welcome to that. So like for, as far as the dreams go, to be I'm welcoming that, this loved one, whatever. So I don't close that out. I guess that's how I want to phrase that. It's just
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that whole thing of welcome everything and don't push anything away, that's a wonderful idiom for all of life, just, and even the tough stuff, right? You've experienced tough things, and probably most of your listeners have experienced, some of the deeper ends of life, right? And working with some people with their grief, the, I'd be just marveling that so many of them would say, but I want to feel all of this. I don't wish any of it away, because this is my way to grow and to be present with what's happened. And they're making a lot of meaning out of what's happened for them.
yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, it's really something I don't think people think about very much. That it's kind of like you can be in charge of that. You don't have to set it off to the side and so on. So
Right. Yeah. I notice that if the people who are able to grieve right up close to an event, that if you can really allow your bodily experience of grief to express itself fully, like keening is such a powerful thing. If people have probably heard of that, the wailing, and they probably have experienced themselves. And once that corridor is opened up within you, within myself, it felt like this great river pouring through me. And it just felt like so much part of all of life
yeah.
to allow that to move through me. And I know so many people who have a hard time allowing their bodily response to the depth of grief.
Mhm.
And I know it's hard. We don't have ways in our society anymore that show us how to do that. And so I know it's hard, but I also know that if we don't deal with that howl, that wail that's in the bottom of our basement,
Mhm.
then it will come, it will numb us
Yep.
for years to come.
Yep.
It'll
Yep.
be harder to come back to the further away we are from it.
Yeah.
So however it is you can tend and allow the depth of that anguish to come through, hopefully with loved ones, or somebody trusting and safe with you to help witness and hold,
Mhm.
then you will have the energy for the next steps to get through all that still has to be endured and come through.
That's great. That's great. So what is the future for you? More books, or what are you thinking you might do as we go forward?
Yes. Well, I'm keeping the writing going through my Substack post, so I invite people to check in. Um, they're free at this point, so I write every several weeks on topics related to these themes. So I really invite people to check that out.
We'll put a link to that too in our podcast notes so people can find you, but that's really fun. So, is there anything else you'd like to share before we end today?
Hmm. Well, I guess what we've talked about in terms of grief, and it's just that eternal paradox
Mhm.
that of grief and joy, and that joy can actually come through in the most surprising way
Yeah.
when we allow grief to have its place.
Yeah.
And that's the big surprise that that those of us who've gone that far, have experienced. So don't be afraid, because there's more to it than just the misery. There is something that breaks through.
Yes. Yes, I 100% agree with that. So that's yes. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to reading your book, as I'm sure many of our listeners do too, because it sounds very interesting.
Thank you so much, Christine. All the very best.
Thank Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that the stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.